Preview. Preview.
All right. Hello. So I have a topic that I want to talk about, and it's what's countries' goals? Like, what goals do countries have? Do countries have goals? Like, what goals that each country has? Is a question that we should ask ourselves. We should ask our governments. So I'm going to talk about some countries more than others. Near the end of this video, I'm going to talk somewhat about Canada and Quebec, which is where I come from and where I've been living for a whole bunch of time. I will have some open questions about South Korea, which is where I'm living now. And I'm going to talk in some detail about a variety of countries and different examples of what countries can do right, do wrong, which countries have good plans but poor execution, which countries have like poor plans and relatively good execution. The world is, a lottery. People do their best, I guess, but it doesn't always work. So let's start. Let's start with some countries that did well. Did well in terms of what? In terms of having an idea and making it happen. Because some things that I find a bit depressing, especially where I live, in Canada and in Quebec especially, is that people take everything for granted. Like my friends, they can easily have these topics of like, talking about other countries as being like poor, shitty countries or like looking down on other countries or cultures. But I politely don't say much about it. But but the question I would like to ask them is, what did you do to make your own country rich? Or what did you do to be prosperous? Because most of my friends, all they did was being born there and do the strict minimum to have a like very mediocre job and not even be that good at it. And just because the situations allows them become arrogant and like fairly wealthy, which I've seen no merit in, to be honest. And I think it's a strategy that could be costly in the long term because, you have to work for things to actually work and you have to have a plan. So a country that's interesting I find is Singapore. So Singapore, since its foundation in 1965, has had a variety of problems and a variety of goals. So from the very creation of the country, their problem was multiculturalism. They had three very big ethnic groups, mostly Chinese people, Indian people, and Malaysian people. And no social unity, extremely poor country, no military, big rivals, a lot of instability, no water resources, not enough housing, not almost non-existent healthcare. The country was a mess. So one of my personal heroes, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, worked pretty hard to, make a plan for the city and tackle these problems one by one and turn Singapore into a fairly thriving and prosperous city. And if you look at his master plan and his speeches from the 60s and 70s and even 80s, many things he predicted would happen actually happened. He was a very lucid person. And one of the things he said is like, he said that back then, if people thought that China would remain a poor country, it means that you were extremely stupid and ignorant. And I mean, his words grew up very well because China turned out to be pretty rich and powerful, only that Lee Kuan Yew knew this long time ago. Lee Kuan Yew planned the city to be green, to have like parks and trees, way before it was trendy. So because it was part of the city policy very long time ago, the city, despite being a small, overpopulated place, has a surprising amount of green spaces. He has a very structured plan for housing. In Singapore, it's very complicated. You don't actually own property. It's kind of leased to you for, if I'm not mistaken, 100 years. But the thing is, and in Singapore, it's extremely expensive. But they kind of help you get one house to every citizen. So the idea is that your house is worth a lot, and within your lifetime, I mean, you should, die before your time expires. So this is kind of like a backup reserve that everybody kind of has. The system of retirement and healthcare is planned to be sustained by the own contributions of the people. So the idea is that, it's not one generation paying for the other one. It's each generation paying for itself. So they have less problems or more resistance to shifting population pyramids, which is a huge problem in other countries. And water was a big problem for them. They didn't have enough water. They had to import water from Malaysia. And through time, they have developed the three main taps of Singapore, collecting very efficiently rainwater, desalinating water. What else? Well, importing still some water, purifying their wastewater with new water, which is a very interesting technology, using ozone. So they are planning and they are succeeding in having a very stable and reliable self providing of water. So in the last 50, 60 years, they have made a whole bunch of plans. They have carried them out really like very seriously. They've worked on it. The whole population, the government, everyone, they have ensured there were goals and they were to a certain extent reached. They have a decent fund, a decent sovereign fund to fund their future problems and expenses. And they even have taken, this is really from the beginning, from the 60s, 70s, but they have tackled other problems. For example, gambling. A lot of money was being gambled and out of Singapore, because Singapore was not, gambling was not allowed. So they created a framework to build casinos in Singapore, which was a big change for such a conservative country. And they managed to do it in a way that they make money. It's very well framed. It's very controlled. So they keep having these projects. They want housing is still like space, and housing is a problem. And right now they are moving Paya Lebar base to Changi Airport, freeing a whole lot of space for land development, and they develop the land very efficiently. They're planning to do like space for housing and a whole variety of services that they would need. And there is also the Tuas port that they are developing in an extremely impressive way. So, they have goals to reach and they continue building the country for, they always say they plan for the next 100 years. And I can talk about Singapore endlessly. I mean, they have, for example, an underground distribution of services like water, electricity, internet, etc. is made by the city, by the government. It's everywhere. It's easy to access. You don't need to dig to get these things to any place. So that's, I would say, my top of countries that had goals, reach them, keep having new goals, keep working to reach them. But maybe I talk a bit too much about it, so I'll talk about other ones, maybe a bit less. So another shining example of success in relation to planning and reaching these goals is Israel. So Israel started in the late 40s, early 50s, and was in a very hostile land where essentially all the surrounding countries were their enemies. And they had some funding, they had some help, but the situation was very, very difficult. And I mean, it's very controversial because I can understand that many people disagree or agree with how things were carried on. So I'm not an expert sufficient enough to say if what they did was good or bad in moral terms. But in practical terms, they did set goals and they reached them. So they had interesting goals, for example, about water supply. They made underground tunnels to provide the whole country with water and be able to do agriculture in a fairly desertic place. They had the very serious and important defense issues about creating their own weapons, because even a small embargo of supplies for weapons would pretty much signify their entire destruction. They had very ambitious goals regarding becoming a pole of innovation and technology, and they have become exactly that. It's an extremely innovating country that creates new technology at an incredible pace. Their defense system, among others, Iron Dome, some of their weapons are extremely modern, such as the Merkaba tank, are perfectly adapted to their needs and their technology. And they made an impressive use of technified irrigation or solar panels. So it's a very interesting country to look at from these perspectives. And they even had plans, in the 80s or 70s, they wondered if they should plant food for subsistence or if they should plant citrus, such as oranges or fruits from this family, and sell them, and with the profit feed themselves. So it was a risky gamble because if you produce, you cannot live out of oranges. You cannot eat them and survive with them. That's what I mean. So had this gone wrong, they would have starved to death. But it turned out to be profitable, so they managed to export citrus, and with this money, buy food, import food from other countries, and it has turned out to be a fairly wealthy and stable country within the region. Right now, the challenge they have, the major challenge or goal they have, is to normalize their relationship with their neighbors. So this has been an ongoing process for a fairly long amount of years, maybe decades. They have a very stable relationship with Egypt, a decent relationship with Jordania, and they are normalizing their relationships gradually with even Saudi Arabia, Dubai. They're establishing like diplomatic relationships. So the tendency is to normalize their relationships. And what is interesting is that, the surrounding countries have a very similar geography to Israel. They just don't buy Israel products because they hate each other, to put it in simple terms. but they could both benefit for trading, for exchanging this type of technology, such as irrigation, their energy production, water purification, water desalination. Israel even had launched satellites into space. It's a very, very modern country. So, you know, if they could befriend their neighbors, they could sell them products, export their technology, export their knowledge, their logistics, etc. They could benefit the region. But of course, it will not be easy. But they are working to that, and based on their track record of tackling challenges, I still rate it in a country that, in very difficult situations with very unfriendly neighbors, are doing something, you know. Other country, China. Oh my God, China is such an impressive success. It's very controversial because, again, my Canadian friends kind of hate China. I'm like, why do you hate China? And they are like, they have no reason. I mean, they listen, they watch American news, and they've learned like sheep to repeat that they hate China, but there is no reason for them to hate China. They say things like Chinese products are bad, and I'm like, but you like iPhones? And they're like, yeah, I love iPhones. And I'm like, do you know iPhones are made in China? They're like, no. Then I show them in their own iPhone that is made in China, and you know, they kind of like disconnect from reality and change topic because they cannot accept these two like realities that they have in their mind. One is that an iPhone is the perfect creation of God, and the other thing is that everything made in China is crap. So I'm like, but the perfect creating of God is made in China. And their brain like resets, and they start a new topic like, hey, good morning, Victor, how are you? And then I re-say the same topic, and they reset every time. So, you know, hating a country based on propaganda is pretty cheap and lame. So let's go into more serious things. Like 50 years ago, what was happening in China? Agricultural country, very undeveloped, very poor. And I mean, it's not an exception. Most countries are by nature poor. Like humanity by birth is poor. Like when you're born, you're poor. You have nothing, you have no possessions. And your risk of dying is very high. So, I mean, I could list Peru, Bolivia, Uganda, Congo, China, a whole bunch of countries were poor, even India 50 years ago. So being poor was not especially bad, but of course it's not especially good. And in the topic of my video, it's about what did they do about it. So they normalized relationships with the trade organization, and this happened in 2001. And well, it started way before that, of course, with Deng Xiaoping. I mean, yeah, I don't know how much back I should go into this, but let's start with Deng Xiaoping because it's easier from there. He had a very interesting plan of opening up the Chinese market to the world, because China was a fairly closed economy back then, and they made social experiments by like opening small regions that had like very defined rules and very circumscribed spaces. And the idea was to try how to trade with the foreign world in ways that would benefit China and would be beneficial enough for other countries to actually like it. So they did a series of tests. The most successful of this is, of course, the region of Shenzhen, which is near Hong Kong. And, you know, it proved out to be a very, very efficient system to allow foreign companies to work there, have a very high ratio of participation of Chinese companies in the partnerships, offer low-cost, high-quality workers, and develop gradually at the beginning and extremely fast later world-class infrastructure. So roads, train, metros, ports. China has an incredibly developed infrastructure. So what happened in these 50 years? China became, from a poor country, in terms of the population, a middle class country, like a country with a very, very significant middle class. And the quality of life of millions of people is not something that we can take lightly. I mean, people have these political ideas, you know, they like communism or dislike it, or capitalism or whatever. And of course, it's everybody's right to like or dislike politics, but I mean, beyond politics, it's humans, it's people who are living in extreme poverty, who are living in much better conditions. So I really don't see how this is a bad thing. And yeah, they increased the average salary by a ridiculous amount. Like last time I checked, I think it went in 30 years from $700 per year to $13,000 per year. So it's an exponential increase. And I mean, I've been to China. You can see just how much they have there. And you know, That's very impressive. And what I like about it, and again going back to my topic, is that they had a very serious plan about it. You know, they tested how it would work. They started little, opening the country more and more. And contrary to what people seem to imagine, they didn't force any foreign company to go to China. Like, they didn't show up to the US or Europe with a gun and be like, send your companies here or I'll shoot you. Companies went there because they thought it was good business. And if now they are regretting it, well, pull away, go somewhere else if you think it's a better business. You know, it's they set the rules and they set them extremely clearly. They said, like, guys, you can come to China under this set of specific rules. Western companies went there and made a stash of money, like billions of dollars, by producing high quality products at an extremely low price. And now somehow, like, China is the bad guy in this story. I mean, these companies are absolutely like soulless. They did whatever they did for profit. So yeah. Anyways, so without getting too much into politics, I'm sorry. China has a very, 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 very interesting record of, you know, making a plan, achieving it. And now they are faced with very serious problems: water management, energy management, and population management, because their population pyramid is like shifting towards aging. So it will be up to them to prove if they can sustain their growth, because it's not an easy challenge what they are facing. And a country that's already facing that situation head on is Japan. So Japan, after World War II, was completely devastated and ruined, and had an interesting program for rebuilding. And, you know, from the 50s to the 80s were extremely booming economy. Given their lack of resources and comparatively small population, they had production growth that predicted that they would surpass the United States in terms of economy, kind of like China is doing now. Although China has a better shot just by its sheer size, amount of resources, and population. But just try to imagine how rich and powerful Japan was in the 80s, so that the Americans were making movies in which they were fearing the overtake of American companies by the Japanese. And the thing with them is that they had a bubble, an economic bubble that bursted, and they have this huge inverted pyramid of population, so a whole lot of old people and very few young people to sustain their workforce. This is the future for China, and this is the future for South Korea, for example. So Japan is doing a acceptable job at tackling it. I mean, they are trying, but they are not really succeeding. That's why I'm not putting Japan in the countries that do good. I'm putting into the countries that do so-so, because they did try things. Shinzo Abe especially tried some strategies that were interesting, like try to devaluate the yen, which is a very common strategy in other countries, but an extremely revolutionary strategy in Japan. Because of Brexit, it absolutely did not work. Because, well, I don't know how much you're interested about this, but the idea of devaluating your currency is that it's worth less, so you can export more because your products become more competitive. And you do that by printing a lot of your currency. In the case of Japan, yen. And other countries like to buy currencies that are safe and reliable. So the currency that is the most bought is US dollars, because it's considered the most safe and reliable reserve currency. So every country likes to have some amount of US dollars to be able to pay for stuff in a reliable way. But another safe currency was the euro and the pound, the British pound. The thing is, Brexit brought uncertainty. We did not know like how well it would turn out for Europe or for the UK. And after those three currencies, the US dollar, the euro, and the British pound, well, another big reserve currency is the Japanese yen. So when Japan was printing yen like crazy to devalue their money, many countries were buying yen as a kind of like emergency reserve currency. So they did not really allow the yen to depreciate. So they did not really became like really competitive in the market. So the yen just remained fairly appreciated, and the economic downturn in Japan has remained pretty like they have a deflationary system. I don't know how much in detail I should get into this, but they don't have inflation for 30 years essentially. So, you know, might sound good. Price don't really increase in the way you expect in other economies, but also salaries don't increase. And the fact that their active population is decreasing and their total population is also decreasing, all of this put deflationary pressure in the country. So their economy is shrinking by all these forces. And until now, they have not found an efficient way to control or cancel these problems. It's still a very wealthy and important country. but they are not solving their problems. They are struggling. Now you have Germany. Germany in 2000, when I talked about them, they were doing pretty bad. Their internal consumption was pretty low. Their government was pretty saturated with expenses, and the country was going nowhere. It was a rich country, like divagating. But they kind of got their things together. The priority of Germany as a country is to maintain stable and powerful small and medium companies in rural areas. It's a really unconventional way of doing business, but Germans are extremely good at it to produce high quality products, usually from companies that people never ever heard the name of. So they make like parts for other machines that other countries or other companies buy that are extremely reliable, but they don't always need to be famous for what they do. And they invest so much in a productive and efficient workforce that they manage to be competitive. So one of the examples was that they were exporting toothbrushes and erasers to China. So they were able, by super modern, high-paid employees and technology, produce these cheap products that in theory China should be able to produce at a better price. To just give an idea how Germany turned their economy around and became a powerhouse of Europe, and is leading in the European Union, which honestly is crumbling by many sides. France is not doing good. Italy has not been doing good for a while. Spain and Portugal are time bombs, and the UK just like jump off the boat. So Germany is carrying this thing, and now they were doing pretty good until now, but they are facing pretty serious energetic problems because they shut down their nuclear facilities, which is not a bad thing in itself. I mean, I am not a huge fan of nuclear, although I have to say my friend Simon did make me more moderate toward this topic. My friend Simon is like a guru of nuclear energy, so he had very compelling arguments, and I have to give it to you, Simon. So, you cannot be stubborn against serious arguments. So I had to change from totally opposed to nuclear to fairly balanced. I can see good sides about it. So one good side is that it produces very little CO2 emissions. And despite the huge problems about and risks about radiation, some of these risks have been somewhat exaggerated, but not all. The problem being that since Germany closed most or all of their nuclear plants, well, they use coal to generate electricity, and coal, not only it's extremely polluting, but it's now scarce. It's not scarce on Earth, but it's scarce in the current market. There's a current energy crisis right now that is affecting China, among other things, but had Germany had a reliable source of nuclear energy right now, they would not have been having this problem. So how will they tackle the energy transition to green energy? Right now, there is not enough green energy to make the country work, and the cost of electricity is extremely high. So they are going back to very traditional sources of energy, such as coal and gas. So there is Nord Stream, a direct connection for Russian gas to Germany, and now they have, guess how would they name a second connection of Nord Stream? They were very creative. They named it Nord Stream 2. And Nord Stream 2 is feeding even more gas directly into Germany from Russia. So it's an interesting relationship because some people say that it will give a lot of power to Russia to just threaten to close the gas from Germany. But it's a two-way deal. I mean, Germany does have to pay money to Russia, and Russia wants and needs money. So I think Ukraine will suffer more from, as already suffered a lot for Nord Stream 1 and will suffer even more for Nord Stream 2, because Russia can and has closed the gas to Ukraine, for example, to the other way the gases go through, but has not shown an intention to close the gas to Germany, because it's his most reliable buyer. They buy a lot of gas and they always pay. Germans pay. They pay cash and they pay fast. So yeah, but still, it's gas, and gas we know is not the most green solution. So the green transition is not going really well. They have some problems. So yeah, Germany is the country that still doing good. I mean, based on what they did in the recovery period up until now, unification went fairly well for many parameters. But their energy transition, I have doubts. Let's go down in the list of mismanaged countries. The UK. The UK followed a ideological separatist ideology. I know this pretty well. We have them in Quebec. Sadly, it's not the brightest people who tend to join this type of movements, and it's not the smartest people who tend to follow them. But the thing is, Why did the UK want it to be separated? Like they say they were like oppressed by the European Union and they were forced to have people, from other countries. But how oppressed were they? For example, in terms of like controlling their currency, they still had their British pound. So they had control over their production of money, their supply of money, which I believe is a very essential power a country should have. So they negotiated well when they joined the union. Keeping this power was smart. They still control their borders, so there were no open borders with the UK. You had to check, you had to pass a control, and they could find valid reasons to not let you in. And they did allow people with specific jobs to enter. And now that these people left after Brexit, well, they are lacking in manpower. So they need people to perform very simple and specific tasks, such as driving trucks. But most of their drivers came from European Union countries, and now they've been kicked out, and they don't want to go back. I mean, unless they were offered excellent conditions, which the UK is not offering right now. So they did this, but the reasons might seem good if you're emotional about it. But objectively, I mean, they just had a huge European market to sell their products easily in, while keeping very reasonable amount of independence, like their own, still a fairly decent control of their borders and a fairly decent control of their currency. So this is the kind of move the government does, in my opinion, without a goal. Like, what's the 50-year plan goal of that? What are they looking forward to become? Like, did they have a master plan? Because from the other countries that I talked, I mean, Germany wanted to become the powerhouse of Europe. They did it. Singapore wanted to become, rich, independent, stable. They did it. Israel wanted to keep existing. Until now, they did it. China wanted to transition from a poor agrarian country to a growing, developing economy with a very important place in world trade, world finances, have a modern and very competent army, and have impact in the world, which I think from their population, their history, and their culture, they absolutely deserve. So they reach these goals. What will the British reach with their Brexit? I mean, they fueled the separatist movement in Northern Ireland and Scotland, because I mean they separated from the European Union. What's their counter argument from these other subsections wanting to separate and to perhaps rejoin the European Union? I don't understand the logic. The arguments they come out with are very weak from an argumentary point of view. It's like they regain their country. I'm like, well, you have it now. What are you gonna do about high prices, penuries, no people to work? Starts to make no sense. Canada is also there a bit. Where is Canada going? What does Canada want? What does Quebec want? What's their goal? What are we working to achieve? What are we working to become? What do we want to be the best at? We're supposed to be trying to be green, but our current prime minister is fighting hard to defend very polluting petrol production. The population, they talk about being green, but they still like to drive, big SUVs, live in their big suburban houses, and have the more polluting lifestyle unimaginable. Travel a lot. I mean, I'm not an exception to this. I'm a bit less arrogant about pretending to not be like that. So yeah, Canada is, it's doing well. There is money in Canada. It's a very stable and safe life. I cannot complain about it. But I criticize the government, both provincial and federal, for not having a clear target, don't being like, guys, in the next 30 years, we have to achieve that. Let's work together to reach it. Let's inspire the population to do something. What? What do we want to become? Do we want to stop being the puppet of the US? We're not even trying. We're following them into their dumbest ideas, like their woke ideas. The dumbest things they could come up with, we're trying to follow in them. Well, not me, but some people. It's not a goal. Not even trying, no plan. Then we come to Venezuela. So Venezuela does have the advantage, in my opinion, of having tried something. They had an idea. So what happened with Venezuela is that it was a fairly poor country 50 years ago. Then there were huge reserves of oil that were discovered. But when I say huge, is Saudi Arabia size huge, huge. So they have petrol in huge amounts in the Orinoco Valley of Venezuela. And the country became very rich very fast with this. The average salaries raised incredibly. The quality of life started to increase. But the social tension increased a lot. Why? Because many people in Venezuela felt like they could see that there was a lot of money in the country, but they could not see a direct benefit from this wealth. So it's hard to judge because a solid economic policy says that when you earn a lot of money from one single resource, such as oil, you should not spend it too directly in your economy because you will create an inflation and you will render your own products less competitive. This is known as the Dutch disease. So that's what happened to the Netherlands when they started producing gas and oil from the North Sea. So it's a known phenomenon. So I didn't study Venezuela in detail. So were the leaders back then thinking about this and investing slowly in the country to prevent the Dutch disease? Did they have a master plan about it? I don't know. And if they did, they didn't see it clearly and they didn't do it clearly. Was there corruption and a lot of mismanagement in South America? So yes, certainly. But then came Hugo Chavez. So Hugo Chavez was a left-wing politician who tried to overtake the government, if I'm not mistaken, with guns, and he failed. But then he tried again with elections, and he actually won the election fair and square. He got elected, and the first thing he did is take the money, the oil wealth, and invest it in a whole bunch of social services. So hospitals, schools, and allow Cuba to survive by giving them oil and money. So yeah, the Cuba part was debatable, but helping their population is not something that you could consider a bad thing. I mean, it's a very good intention. And that's why I put it, still in a medium country, even though it's completely bankrupt at this moment. The idea was noble. Like he had a good idea, maybe not a good plan, but he had a very valid moral idea of helping the population, and he did. The only thing is that they mismanaged a few important elements in Venezuela. One, you cannot rely in one single resource and assume that it's going to provide the same amount of money forever, because prices go up and down. And they were going up for a while when Hugo Chavez got into power, so they were spending more and more every year in these social services. But it was a risky strategy. They got, of course, into the Dutch disease, so because their acquisition power increased, their currency appreciated, their product became less competitive, and they started destroying their internal production, importing a lot. They had enough money to import, so it was getting risky at this point. And even worse, they were not investing in maintaining their oil production facilities, and this is a fatal mistake. When you have one source of revenue, you better ensure that this source of revenue is working. I mean, come on, you have one source of revenue, maintain it. So producing, there is bituminous oil in Venezuela. It's not pure oil that you can just put a pipe and it comes out. It's mixed with sand. So it needs a lot of investment to maintain, the production, refinement, transport. It's very energy. It requires a lot of investment, and I mean, Venezuela could have invested in that. And well, I think will my video stop? I think maybe another video started, but for you guys it will make no difference. I'm sorry. So the thing is, they did not invest in their source of revenue. So what happened? All prices went down. So suddenly they started having less money. They had not other sources of income. The opposite, the Dutch disease had ensured their local economy was as weak as ever, and their infrastructure for producing oil was really bad. So then the government turned fairly authoritarian and stopped being kind to the population and kind of just sticking to power. And even though Hugo Chavez, the creator of this movement, which is Chavismo, died, his successor, which is Maduro, and I would say Maduro is the second most stupid South American politician, the first by far being Alan Garcia. Alan Garcia from Peru is by far the most stupid human ever existed. Maybe not the most stupid human ever existed. The most stupid human that I know of. But anyways. So yeah, Nicolas Maduro continued the same policy of Hugo Chavez, which was to just stay in power and don't make any structural reform that could actually fix the problem. And the sustained low prices of oil has ensured that their revenues are extremely low. Their currency has extremely devaluated, and the country is sadly poor at this moment. So maybe it should be in the really mismanaged countries, deserves its place there, definitely, because from where they started, I mean, they ended up worse. The only thing I see is that there was an ideal behind it. There was a good intention and good actions. Some people had a increase of life quality during a short period, but I mean, in the long run, it's an absolute failure. And other countries should learn from this. So in South America, a lot of propaganda is used based on Venezuela, like they don't want to become the new Venezuela, but it's unlikely that they do. Unless they have this huge amount of oil, they will not face the same problems. You know, Venezuela problems, they say like huge resources can be a blessing and it can also be a curse. So in this case, it was a curse. For other countries to have exactly the same problems, well, they would have to have the same conditions, which is not the case. So yeah, there is things to be learned from this Venezuela. Well, then now there's Peru. Peru, I put them in the bad countries because over the last since 1990, so 1990, 2000, over the last 20 years, the economy and quality of life in Peru has increased very decently. The country has seen some stability, sustained growth, a very high increase in quality of life, and I would say it's the opposite of Venezuela. I did not see any good plan or intention. It was just playing it safe, just doing, whatever worked. So what worked was a stable free market economy, respecting international laws, paying their debts to the International Monetary Fund, and essentially shutting up about most issues. Was a dumb plan in that it was not, clear, it was not masterminded, but successive governments of different political views, like left wing or right wing, have kind of followed the same path and didn't change it that much. And the country kind of performed well. Whereas Venezuela, in my opinion, had a much better ideal, but they fucked up completely, sadly. Did I talk about Brazil? Because Brazil is an interesting country in this field. Brazil had very cool goals. At some point, I was really hopeful about Brazil and what Brazil was doing in South America. So essentially, for a period, Brazil had this idea of becoming the brain of South America, the brain and the muscle, of becoming like the dad of South America, of becoming what Germany is for Europe, becoming for South America. And they had absolutely all the conditions to succeed. So their plan was to make a coalition with South American nations and make use of the resources they all had. So, as I mentioned extensively, Venezuela has oil. Brazil has a lot of things, among other things, resources, a good population, a developed amount of technology, and there is mining here and there is like agriculture, there is a lot of things in South America. What we don't have in South America is unity. We don't get along well. Especially Spanish-speaking countries, we don't get along well with other Spanish-speaking countries. We just don't. But we don't really have that much of a problem with Brazil. So a Spanish-speaking country taking the lead of other Spanish-speaking countries? Unlikely. The last in the list being, of course, Spain. We would rather die than listen to Spain. And other Latin American countries also not. But Brazil taking the lead kind of worked. I mean, when they created UNASUR, I was very hopeful. It was this coalition, so they had the goal of, putting more ideas together and we're making something work out. It was interesting because very similar cultures, very similar history. Portuguese and Spanish are very similar languages, so it had all the ingredients to work, to a certain extent to work. And the idea was that Brazil would become relevant in world affairs by leading this bloc, because despite being big and having a big population, compared to other countries or to other continents, Brazil is fairly far and fairly small. But if they could, lead this bloc and sign treaties in group, it could lead somewhere. So I was pretty hopeful about this. But the problem with Brazil is that there was no continuity. So the government that followed, this was Lula who had all these ideas, went exactly the other direction. And they went about this idea that countries around them are like poor and underdeveloped and not smart, which I will not deny to a certain extent is true. But it's within the grasp of Brazil. It's the kind of countries that Brazil can understand, can to a certain extent relate to, and can to a very great extent lead. But now Brazil is trying a strategy of trading directly with big world powers in what I would consider a position of weakness. So they are trying. switching roads completely. So now Lula is planning to come back for the next elections when you switch back to this road completely. So at least they are trying of something, but there is a lack of continuity. It would help Brazil to, whatever path they choose it and stick to it over a few governments, kind of like Peru did by almost chance, and try to develop into something. You know, they always say it's better to, like, instead of half-assing two things and fail at both, like full-assing one thing and kind of doing it well. And I really hope for Brazil to go somewhere, but my list is medium low. You know, they had a good idea, but the next government just changed direction completely, and all the gains are gone essentially. UNASUR doesn't exist; it has been replaced by PROSUR, which is a joke in my opinion. Doesn't even matter talking about it. And in the lower part of the list, you have a very important country, which is nothing other than the United States of America. What are the United States thinking now? Where are they going? What do they want? Like, what's in their mind? What do they want to accomplish? They have, like, with Barack Obama, they had some vague ideas of, you know, kind of transferring their interests from the Middle East and Europe to Asia. So this is an ongoing idea that they have, although in my opinion they are doing it in a very confrontational way, which might not work out well for them. But you know, they can try, why not? And they are wanting to and succeeding into polarizing the world. So I mean, it looks good for propaganda and for dividing the population and for relying, you know, to rally the Americans behind a common goal, which is kind of, you know, find an enemy and hate it. But do they really have, you know, a plan for inside their country? The transportation, for example, is a problem. The pollution is becoming a problem. The social tensions are becoming a problem. But are they fixing any of these? In my opinion, no. And they don't have any plan or any benefit to fix them. I mean, the country would benefit, of course, from addressing these problems, but the elites in power don't seem to care. And it's a country that went from very cool and very admired years ago to not so admired nowadays. I mean, many people think they are stupid. Not people specifically, but many people and many, like, leaders. They had Trump, they had Bush. Many people thought Bush would be the dumbest president they could ever have. So some people say Trump is even worse. I don't dislike of them. I don't dislike any of them as much as other people do. In my opinion, Biden is dumber, but I mean, neither of them is really that good. Barack Obama was pretty smart. I really liked him. I was really looking forward with him, but many of the things he promised, even some simple things, he could not carry. So if he did not succeed, I doubt that others would actually, you know, succeed in turning the country around and having it have a restart. I find, and sadly sometimes Canada copies them in that, to just tackle the most daily, most, you know, inconsequential issue and debate endlessly about it, and not have this long-term strategy plan solution. And to conclude, and this, well, I don't know, I hope maybe some of my Korean friends will get to this part. And I'm curious about what Korea, which is where I live now, and I honestly don't live here, don't understand the language, and don't have just enough knowledge to have a valid opinion about it. But I would like to think or start a debate of where does Korea want to go? You know, Korea has made a very nice development from not being very developed or rich in the 50s to extremely developed right now. Korea was a somewhat unknown country. I mean, I like geography, I like Asia, so for me it was never unknown. But for many people, it was overshadowed a bit by maybe Japan, China, or even Russia. Although Ekaterina will hate me if I say that Russia is in Asia, even though 2/3 or 3/4 of it is, and I don't want to debate facts. But the thing is, Korea now is not a country that people don't know about. People know Korean brands, people know Korean music, people know Korean dramas, Korean culture, Korean food, Korean clothing. So Korea is becoming a fairly known country. It's blossoming to the world, and it's becoming important in world affairs, in national affairs. It's always has been very important in the relationship that China has with the world. So I think, I mean, based on the last 5,000 years of history, the relationship that Korea has had and will have with China is extremely important for their development. Korea has a not so good relationship with Japan. and not so good relationship, sadly, with North Korea, which is also Korea, sadly. So yeah, I'm very curious about this. Like, where is Korea going? Like, in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years, what's the idea? What's the dream? You know, do Koreans want a unified Korea? Is it something that makes sense? Do Koreans want to just, move on from North Korea and just forget it's there and do their own life? Think many young people think this way. What do Koreans see with Japan in the long term? Like, do they want to build up on the kind of forced friendship they have based on their alliance with the US? How Koreans see their relationship with China, which is, for the time being, in the trajectory of very exponential growth. So do they see a good and close relationship with China as a goal? Something to build on, something to benefit from? How do they see themselves in this polarization between that the US is creating or is trying very hard to create with China? Do they want to side with the US in the future and like try to do this blockade that economic blockade that Americans are dreaming of doing with China? So these are questions I want to debate with my Korean friends, and I want to discuss because, I don't know. I don't know what to think. I don't know if the government has official, plans or official ideas of where they would like to go. What's the idea with transport? Korea has a very developed maritime transport with very modern ports, a very developed internal system of transport with extensive roads and trains that are magnificent. I use them very often now that I'm here. But to a certain extent, Korea is an island because there is so little to no communication with North Korea that from, an abstract point of view, it behaves like an island. Like air and sea are the most efficient ways to communicate. So I wonder, for example, like just thoughts, would it be conceivable to make a train that passes through North Korea? Like ask North Korea if they can use safe passage? The kind of thing East Germany did with West Germany when they were feeding Berlin. Is it thinkable? Is it desirable? How do they see the relationship with Russia that is not very far up north? These are very interesting questions. There are upcoming problems here in Korea, such as the aging of the population, the competitiveness of many emerging countries, among others China, also Vietnam, are becoming direct competitors with many things Korea produces and offers right now. So what's the plan? What's the idea? I'm really curious and excited about it. So, well, this video turned out to be very long, but I had a lot of things to say, so here they are. And if you want to debate or talk about it, well, of course, write me or comment. Anyways, until next time, take care, guys.